Given the critical role of small and medium enterprises, the role they play in Nigerian economy in the areas of job creations, reduction of poverty, what the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry is now seeking direct and efficient engagement between operators of SMEs and regulatory agencies for enhanced transactions, communications, and responsive feedback mechanism. According to the LCCI, the need for the ease of access to information for SMEs to address gaps between officials of regulatory agencies and owners, managers of SMEs, businesses in engagement process is expedient to eliminate all forms of revenue leakages and transparency issues in their procedures and operations, translating to improved outcomes for both SMEs and the regulatory agencies. To engender significant improvement in the operating environment for SMEs, the LCCI recommends that these service provisions mechanisms includes but are not limited to the provision for e-services platforms for the various services rendered to taxpayers, existence of an anti-corruption tax unit, and reformation of robust complaints grievance mechanisms. Well, to give more insights into this and other issues affecting the operations of SMEs and, of course, regulatory agencies, I have live in our Lagos studio is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Yusuf, good afternoon and happy celebrations.
Good afternoon to you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I want us to start with this study by the Chamber and SIPE, that Center for International Private Enterprises. What prompted this, and what's your direct reaction first to the resolutions, what you saw and all of that after carrying out this study?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, the study was motivated by, first, the critical role of SMEs in the Nigerian economy from the point of view of building an inclusive economy, from the point of view of job creation, from the point of view of also making sure that there are linkages between small businesses, large businesses, and so on and so forth. So on the back of that, we felt that the regulatory environment is a very critical component of the business environment. Most times, we talk more about the macroeconomic environment, we talk about inflation, we talk about infrastructure, but we don't sufficiently address the issue of the quality of the regulatory environment. So that is what motivated the study, which was supported by the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE. Regulation, by its very nature, is supposed to ensure the protection of interests of key stakeholders in an economy. We have the investors. They are very important stakeholder. Their interest needs to be protected. We have the consumers. They're also very important. And we have the general public. So the act of regulation is to ensure a very good balance in the advancement of the interests of all of these key stakeholders. And it is not also so much about having to raise revenue. Because what we have seen in the last couple of years is that revenue generation seems to be looming larger than even the achievement of some of these objectives. So it is important that you have a regulatory environment that speaks to this. And because SMEs are also very vulnerable, regulatory shocks can easily knock them off completely if they are not properly protected against those shocks. I must admit that the government has been doing quite a lot around ensuring that you have better regulatory space for the small businesses. For instance, I know that the Vice President in particular and the Ease of Doing Business Office have been doing a lot around engaging NAFDAC, engaging SON and other regulatory agencies. But there's still a lot that needs to be done, which is what part of the things that this study has thrown up in terms of what needs to be done. There are gaps that have been observed. The study was focused on two agencies,
FRS and
NAFDAC. NAFDAC is a regulatory agency. FRS is not exactly a regulatory agency. It's a revenue generation agency. But you know, the interface between the SMEs and these organizations, of course there are many other regulatory institutions. But these are just kind of case studies, to examine how these things are. And we observe that there are quite a number of things that needs to be done, both on the part of these agencies and on the part of SMEs themselves. In the process of carrying out this research, we also observe the commitment of the agencies to ensure that there's an improvement in the process. We observe that they are also very appreciative of the significance of feedback from this kind of study. Because by the time we finished the study, the agencies were also engaged, with the outcome of the study.
Okay.
We engaged the top hierarchy of NAFDAC. We engaged the top hierarchy of FRS. And we ran through the outcomes. Of course, in some aspects, there were reservations that were expressed. But on the whole, we had a common understanding that in order to improve the business environment, there is need for this kind of feedback, there is need for regular engagement, and there is need for proper and regular communication. So those things are key.
Look at the states. Before you go on, Aba, Kano, and Lagos. Of course, due to high concentration of SMEs, that was why the states were taken. Let's now look at the feedback mechanism that you're talking about. In particular, let's be specific. How does that speak to our kind of SMEs in this country? What kind of feedback do we expect both from the regulators and from the SMEs that can, help us achieve what we really intend to achieve?
Well, first is the need for the SMEs to also to improve on their digital literacy.
That's key.
A lot of these institutions are going digital. Many of the SMEs are not that digitally literate.
True.
So because of that, the kind of benefits or the kind of access that they normally should have had in engaging with these institutions, that access wasn't there.
Yeah.
So we find out in the process of the study that a lot of them still engage intermediaries, either engaging people who are former staff, or engaging the staff, or engaging independent consultants, because they have a perception that all this digital something is too much trouble. So the need for improvement in digital literacy is a very, very important component of this. And of course, the preference for, the procedures, there are also concerns around the length and the bureaucratic nature of some of those procedures. Either the registration process and all of that. Quite a number of them complain that these things take too long for it to be completed. And in the process, some of them feel frustrated about some of these things. And of course, part of the reason they have this is that they are also, because of their literacy level, I'm talking of digital literacy now, that also slows down the process. In the process of looking for intermediaries, looking for somebody who can, So those are also issues. And of course, there are also issues around payments, unreceipted payments and all of that. And of course, these agencies have made it clear that as a matter of policy, there is no avenue, there is no space for anybody to pay cash to any staff. And they have a window to complain. If any staff of these agencies are demanding cash, they are ready to impose significant sanctions on such staff. Because some of them said, okay, sometimes they said they want to say thank you to some staff to show gratitude and all of it. This culture of feeling that when you are dealing with an agency, unless you wet the grass, so to say, nothing will happen. So also, by default, some of them just do that. And the agencies, in our interaction, frown seriously at that. So on the whole, there are issues to be dealt with on the part of the regulators and on the part of SMEs themselves.
This boils down to revenue leakages and transparency issues, DG, like you said, because if this is done properly, it will be positive for the bottom line of both the regulatory agencies and for the SMEs. That's if we are transparent and we block all of these leakages.
Of course. And we have that common understanding, between the regulatory agencies, the FRS, and those of us in the private sector. There's a need to ensure that some of these loopholes are dealt with, there's a need to ensure the seamlessness of the processes, the simplification of the processes. Because sometimes when you have too many processes, too many steps to go through, it becomes too rigorous, it becomes too frustrating, and at the end, people just feel that, okay, let me just pay some people so that they can facilitate the process. So the simplification of this process is also very, very important. But having said that, the whole idea of regulatory governance, beyond the issue of this interface between SMEs and the regulatory agencies, is a very, very important element of the investment environment. Now, this country has a reputation now of having a high regulatory risk. Apart from some of this macroeconomic risk that we have around, the regulatory risk is becoming a major problem for investors.
That's really bad.
Not just for domestic investors, but also for foreign investors.
Yes.
So if you are committed to improving the investment environment, this is one area that we need to address. And there are attributes of a good or quality regulatory governance. One of the key attributes of quality regulatory governance is the transparency of the regulatory process.
True.
And the essence of this transparency is that the process of even putting the regulation in place must be inclusive. We should not have this idea of, or this posture of regulators that feel that they know everything about the environment. And the reality is that most times, those who are operators in the system know better about the environment than the regulators, because they are more in touch with the reality on ground.
Yes.
So the transparency of the process is very, very important. And that speaks to inclusiveness before any regulation is put in place. Ideally, there should be what you call the exposure draft. And I must admit that there are some agencies that do that. They are coming up with a regulation, they first release the draft, they invite the stakeholders for discussion.
Get their views.
Because that process helps to enrich the quality of regulations.
Yes.
It helps to improve the legitimacy of regulations. Yes. It helps to improve the trust environment between those who are regulated and those who are regulating them. It helps to improve compliance with regulations. So, because what we find around our environment is the degree of powers that the regulators exercise. It's almost like an absolute power. And when powers are absolute, it portends a lot of danger and risk.
That's true.
Both to the economy and to the society. So this engagement between the regulatory agencies and the regulated entities are very, very important. Secondly, is the need to ensure a regulatory impact assessment. If you put a regulation in place, it is very important that periodically we do an impact assessment.
Yeah.
Because the regulation is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And this end is not just about the government. It's not just about revenue. It's about investors. It's about the citizens. It's about consumers. It's about competitors. It's about the environment. It's about the public. So these are metrics that we should regularly use to assess the impact of regulation. And unless we do this regularly, the investment environment will be worse for it. Because we have seen regulatory issues that sometimes the businesses are just grappling with. Sometimes some businesses go under, and nobody comes round to check the effect of those regulations on investment or on businesses. So that regulatory impact assessment is a very, very critical component of ensuring quality regulatory governance. It is also important that we have a kind of dispute resolution mechanism. The regulator cannot be all in all.
Of course.
The regulators are also people by human beings. They are not perfect. Some of the things that they put in place may not be exactly desirable. If there is no window to engage and to also ensure that there is a dispute resolution mechanism or a window to address the grievances of the regulated entities, that should not be good for the business environment. Because right now, the regulatory environment is a bit intimidating for many businesses. It's a bit coercive. And whatever regulations comes the way of investors, they just take it. That in this environment, you cannot engage the regulators. You cannot challenge the regulators. The best you can do is probably to go to court. And you can be in court for 10, 15 years. Meanwhile, your business will be suffering. Yeah. And there's also this fear among the regulated entities that if you ever attempt to challenge a regulator, then God help you.
Yes.
If you ever survive in that environment. That kind of mindset we need to change.
True.
Because both the regulators and the investors are here for the same objective. To improve the investment environment, to protect the interests of the key stakeholders, to advance the growth of this economy, to create jobs, to improve government revenue. The objectives are the same. And we should see that kind of relationship, that kind of partnership, improving between the regulatory agencies and there should also be adequate information. Yep. Sometimes you have a regulatory environment where the information around the regulations are not robust enough. Sometimes people are groping in the dark. Sometimes you are in the business, you get up to a point before you realize that there's a new regulation. And the speed with which regulations also change is a major problem. It's something that escalates what we call the regulatory risk. You go to the bank to seek for loan, sometimes run into billions of naira. You put an investment in place based on assumptions of existing regulations or existing policies.
And something happens along the line.
1 year down the road, there's a complete change of regulation. Many businesses have collapsed as a result of these regulatory shocks. So the regulators need to be mindful of the consequences of regulatory changes. They have to see the regulated entities as their partners. Yes. They have to come from the point of view of the fact that they can also gain a lot of knowledge from those who are operators in the economy. They should understand that they don't know everything. They are not perfect. And they should have better listening ears. All in the name of ensuring that we have a better investment environment. That is the whole idea of this conversation. So the study we did, of course, addresses a small section of regulatory issues. But there is a broader issue of the quality of regulatory governance, which we have to take a lot more seriously. And in order to also check this, because you cannot have a situation where nobody can control the regulator.
Shouldn't be.
There should be a system, there should be a framework. We should have independent organizations like the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission, whose mandate is to ensure that you have good investment environment. If there are policies, they should have a mechanism to assess the quality of the policies. They should have a framework to assess the impact of the policies. They should be able to come up with suggestions on the need to modify or review those policies. The same thing with the ease of doing business office. There should be a mechanism to assess the regulatory. And this affects practically all sectors of the economy. Whether you are talking of manufacturing, you are talking of the ICT sector, you are talking of aviation, you are talking of healthcare, you are talking of professional services. There are so many areas. And the regulatory environment can make or mar any investment. So these things are very important going forward. If you are committed to creating jobs, if you are committed to growing revenue, if you are committed to attracting investments, both domestic and foreign, we have to address the issue of regulatory quality.
And I also think that as we try to actualize AFCFTA, I think this is also something that will make businesses more competitive. If all of this checked, DG, what do you think? Any effect on the AFCFTA if we need to get more competitive, and regulators also have a role to play in this?
We need to get more competitive. And if investors are coming to a space and they are not sure of the stability of policy, they are not sure of the stability of the regulatory environment, it will scare them. And within the framework of the AFCTA, the advantage it presents for every country is to be able to attract investors.
Yes.
To make the country a top investment destination, not a market destination. Because of the environment and because of some of these issues, the disposition of many investors around Africa and around the world is to say that, okay, Nigeria is the largest market. Let us produce in country A, B, C, and take it to Nigeria to take advantage of the market. If that happens, we will not be getting value from the AFCTA. So in order to be able to make Nigeria a top investment destination, these are some of the things we need to do. So that Nigeria can be a hub, and we are in the best position to be the economic and commercial hub of the continent, given the size of our economy, given the size of our market. Investors should be producing here and be distributing to other countries in Africa. So unless we address these institutional and regulatory issues, some of these things will not happen. Of course, there are other issues, the structural problems of infrastructure, there are issues of policy, there are issues, other issues exist. But the regulatory environment, the regulatory governance is also very critical to inspire the confidence of investors who want to take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
I think it's a good way to leave it, DG. Yeah. Well said. And we know regulators are also listening, and even government agencies are listening to us, and they will do what is correct, what should be done. I think that synergy needs to be there because we are both working for the same objective, like you highlighted, DG. Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It's always a pleasure having you in the studio. Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate that.